One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.
From Bowie's Creek, North Carolina, Campbell AD Bob Roller is my guest today on One Question. We're going to talk a little bit about hiring head coaches at the mid-major level and the challenge of, at times, having to do that quite frequently if you have successful programs. Also, there are the dynamics, of course, of trying to keep your head coaches in place when they've had a string of success. So, Bob, baseball season now is, I guess, 2 weeks away, technically. And just 2 seasons ago, Greg Goff was your head coach at Campbell. Greg's going to start his first season at Alabama here in a couple of weeks after a stopover at Louisiana Tech. And so to go back to this main point that I mentioned, as a mid-major AD, do you believe that the skills of identifying, vetting, and hiring head coaches may be even more important at the mid-major level than, say, the Power Five or the Group of Five, because it's harder financially to keep a hold of head coaches when they have success? So you got to be even more in tune with who's out there, who could be on your radar if you have a potential change. Is that a skill that's really crucial, even more so for a mid-major AD than, let's say, a Power 5 AD?
Matt, I would tend to agree with you. Obviously, at the Power 5 level, they have incredible pressure and intensity looking at that hire to make the right hire. But they know whoever they're going to get has sat in the first chair, has been a head coach for usually more than a decade, and there's a track record to look at. And at our level, when you're hiring a head coach, it's almost every time you're hiring someone who's never sat in the first chair before, so you're always taking that chance. And for the high-profile revenue-producing sports, the Power 5 assistant coaches have a current salary that's higher than the pool that we're going to pay for a head coach. So right. Some of them will take themselves right out of the spot. Some would say, I want this job, I want to be a head coach so badly that I'm willing to take a lateral cut or lateral pay or a pay cut. But you have to be very careful. They'll say that in the courtship process, but once they arrive, they're not going to really feel that way as much. So it is a delicate balance.
That's an interesting point. The realities of a budget situation or a pay situation maybe don't hit you until the honeymoon wears off. So for baseball specifically, when Greg went to Ruston, you hired Justin Hare, who had been with the program already for a number of years. He's been with you now for a decade in total. When you have an assistant coach, and this goes to your point a little bit of identifying potential, when you have an assistant coach internally who you feel is ready to be a head coach, you don't want to lose them to another program because they're doing such a great job as an assistant. How do you work with your head coaches to maybe incentivize that assistant and give them more program guiding duties, as I'll call it, so they don't entertain leaving maybe as heavily?
Well, it's trust and it's accountability. You can do some small things. You can name them associate head coach. There are words in the business now that people realize, like deputy athletic director and things, where people will know very clearly that this person is the clear-cut number two. But these assistants, if they don't see that you're forward-thinking, and if they don't think not just financially, but the infrastructure and the facility that you play in, if it's not moving forward, they're going to move on and take that job at Georgia or University of Central Florida or wherever is calling for a $20,000 or $40,000 or more, and the promise of being more of a regional team as we're talking baseball. So I really think they've got to see that you're moving forward at a mid-major and not picking one of these sports that's not getting enough attention. Sadly, most mid-majors do not get to fund every one of their sports the way they need to, and the assistant coaches and the head coaches know when they're one of those that's slotted as one that gets it or one that does not. So it's pretty evident to them. And then secondly, when you have a head coach move on positively and not because they've been terminated, there's such a better chance for the assistant to be elevated. Unfortunately for the assistants, when the head coach is let go, that's usually a clean house. But in the case of Greg Goff moving to Louisiana Tech and then to Alabama, he put it together a great staff, and it was the right hire for Justin Hare.
Let's talk a little bit about your facility, because you're getting a significant upgrade on the baseball side. is Coastal Carolina's really long-term success, but of course winning the national championship last year. Do you believe that's opened a lot of eyes, not just there in the Carolinas, but maybe nationwide for mid-majors and their supporters to understand with the right pieces in place in a sport like baseball, you can truly have top-of-the-heap national success?
Absolutely. It's not fair to some of the other sports, but it's the truth. And several years ago, our baseball team won 49 games. 5 or 6 years before that, we were in a stadium that you would basically consider it a T-ball stadium, literally 10 years ago. And now we have a 1,200-seat stadium with turf field, state-of-the-art scoreboard, video board that could host a regional. In less than 10 years, that's happened because baseball is the quickest way that your university, and now with the ESPN contract, can get such great exposure. I would also say softball is the same way now with the way the ratings have gone up for women's softball in the postseason and the television that's come from that with ESPN. Women's basketball and women's soccer, tennis, men's as well. There are the haves and the have-nots, and it's still not that gap has not been bridged enough. But baseball can go to Omaha. Campbell can go to Omaha. Campbell can go to a super regional. Campbell can host a regional, and that's a fact. And we're moving forward, thinking that way.
Now, the year you guys won 49, Bob, was that the year that you didn't make it as an at-large into the tourney?
That's correct. We were 49-10, lost the last game in the Big South tournament to Liberty, and the two teams that went from our league were Liberty and Coastal Carolina that year. There was no one that could ever say with a straight face that we were not a regional team that year, but they sat in a room and came to that decision, and we had to live with it. We have changed some of the parameters since then. Our schedule is incredibly tougher. Most people would tell you that regardless of your schedule, 49-10 is 49-10.
It's pretty remarkable, yeah.
Yes, but our schedule is quite a bit more upgraded now to where I think this year 38 wins would get us in. So it is a different world we live in. We listened. We did not accept it, and we were not happy about it, but we listened.
Yeah, and I was actually looking at your schedule yesterday, not to get too granular here, but is Ohio State visiting your place, you think, a byproduct of the facility and the success, or they just needed a weekend? Where did that stem from?
No, I think it's the facility and the success. We have Virginia Tech coming in here. We'll have our usual run of East Carolina, UNC Wilmington, NC State coming here. We're not just going to someone else's stadium any longer. They could use that excuse or statement 10 years ago to say we really just don't want to play there. But you can't now. The Buies Creek Astros of High A Major League Ball are playing at Jim Perry Stadium now. So I believe a college team can play there.
You know, I've been curious to ask this to someone, and as a baseball guy myself, this whole conversation in the men's basketball world about let's think about analytics and strength of bodies of work beyond the RPI. Do you think that could translate to other sports like baseball and softball down the road?
I think it does. We've learned different things, Matt, that would surprise some of our listeners, probably not the folks in the industry, but it's better for baseball to go on the road and only win one over a weekend than it is to sometimes stay home and sweep a series. It doesn't always make a lot of sense, but sometimes 1-2 is better than 3-0 on a weekend in February. So you have to pay attention to that. You have to get on the road and play a series, say maybe make a trip to Florida or South Carolina or Georgia and play a 3-game series. But Samford, a school where I worked in the past, was a few years ahead of where we are now. Campbell is following that same path, and now you have Samford having home series with Power 5 schools as well, home and home all the time.
Yeah, Casey Dunn's done an excellent job at Samford. Like you mentioned, and most people who are probably listening to this know that prior to your time at Campbell, which started in 2011, you were at Samford as the athletic director, and then previous to that on staff for a long stretch. So you've been a part of a lot of changes in the landscape of college athletics over the last 20 plus years. The FCS landscape, the Ohio Valley Conference landscape, the SoCon landscape, the Big South landscape, the Pioneer League. As you kind of think back on the last 2 decades, are there trends that you've really seen in the industry that kind of are red flags to you on maybe where we're going?
Well, there are definitely trends. Some may be red flags, but some are certainly trends. You're right. I've been around a long time now, and the two institutions where I've been the athletic director were in 6 different conferences. All the way back to the Trans-America Athletic Conference was the first one that I inherited in the late 90s. So I actually remember being at an NCAA event in the mid-1980s when the first seismic shift began with the College Football Association. When television was deregulated for football. I happened to be fortunate enough to work for the Orange Bowl Committee for 3 years in the late 80s, early 90s, where 2 of our games had Notre Dame involved. And in 91, that was when Notre Dame signed its unprecedented deal with NBC that still stands for its home television games. So I've seen the money increase incredibly, and the NCAA basketball tournament for men is still the enormous moneymaker, but every time the decisions have been driven by football. And that's been for the last quarter century. So every major conference decision has been football driven. So I do believe that is still the kingpin of college sports without question, even though the money is so great for the NCAA.
Yeah,
I would say to
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
To finish your question, though, I would say the major issue that we're reaching a boiling point is the Power Five and its increasing autonomy, and what will happen to the remaining 170 or so Division I schools that don't fall under that umbrella over the next 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, I'm interested how the student-athlete time balance conversation, and specifically as it pertains to travel, and the Big South obviously is a bus league, but how will that impact you guys if it goes into place?
It will impact you. Each and every time that they meet, practice is lessened, and every coach I've dealt with since 1979 has said that practice is the key. So everyone has to work smarter. There were needs. There most definitely are needs. That time demand where you can't go before 6 a.m. Usually now the Power Five has kept 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. open. I agree with that. These things have to happen, but you have to remember at other levels, you don't have as many options for a later day class that a Power Five may have. So we used to practice at 5 o'clock in the morning for some sports so they could finish, have breakfast, and be at an 8 o'clock class. And so it's not as easy as just waving a wand and saying no one can start practice till a certain time, but it's a major issue that we all have to pay attention to. It's not going away, and the student athletes deserve time and rest and away from the sport. But it's harder for those with less money and less opportunity to create new classes and say, let every football player start class at noon. You can't do that at many places.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.